Welcome to our lesson on ecological communities. The key questions for today are: what is an ecosystem? What is a community? How do different populations interact? What do different populations compete for? What makes a community stable? The key words you will need to know are interdependence, competition, stability, survive, reproduce. An ecosystem is a community of different organisms living together in a habitat. A community is made up of different populations or groups of organisms from different species. A population is a group of organisms of the same species that live in the same habitat at the same time. An example could be a pond ecosystem. The habitat would consist of the pond, and possible communities could consist of frogs, toads, water lilies, dragonflies, fish, pondweed and herons. All of these organisms would interact with each other and their environments. The different communities would compete for some resources like space, food, shelter, oxygen or sunlight. For example, both the lilies and the pondweed are plants, so require light from the sun in order to carry out photosynthesis to produce their own food. So they would compete with each other to gain access to the water surface for that. This is called intraspecific competition, as it is between different species. Interspecific competition occurs within a species, either between individuals or different populations of that species. For example, in our pond ecosystem, 2 herons could compete for the fish. Organisms that are better adapted, this means have more useful features, are more likely to outcompete another, or in other words, win what they are competing for. So, the best adapted heron gets most of the fish. Task: list all the things you can think of that plants and animals would compete for. Extension: can you think of any characteristics that the organisms could have that help them to compete for these things? Animals compete for anything that can help them survive or reproduce. This includes territory or space, food, water, shelter, and mates. Characteristics that can help them do this include good eyesight, horns and claws, strong legs for climbing. Plants compete for the materials they need for photosynthesis and growth: sunlight, carbon dioxide, oxygen, water, and mineral ions. Plants also reproduce, so compete for seed dispersal or pollination. Flowering plants have adaptations to help them to attract animals or insects to aid this. For example, bees pollinate flowers and are attracted by patterns, colours and smells. Animals can disperse seeds by eating sweet-tasting fruits or carrying and dropping seeds that stick to their fur. Task: look at this picture of a water buck. What do you think it needs to compete for, and how do its adaptations help? The waterbuck, like all animals, would need to compete for mates. It has long horns to help it fight off competitors, and white markings on its face and rump to allow it to be identified by its young. They would also need to compete for food and water, as well as territory. The horns help to fight off predators and competitors, as well as attract mates. The brown colour allows it to camouflage with the surroundings so that it can eat and drink more safely. Organisms that compete more successfully are more likely to survive and reproduce, thus continuing on their species. In an ecosystem, all of the organisms depend on each other. This could be for food, for protection, or for aspects involved in reproduction. This means that if one organism in an ecosystem was eliminated, the others would decrease and suffer problems too. We call this interdependence. An example of interdependence is that insects pollinate flowers, allowing fruits to grow. Animals eat the fruits and disperse the seeds. This means that the animal is fed and the plant's seeds have been spread so more can grow. Another example of interdependence is cows and birds. The birds eat the insects that land on the cows. This benefits both animals. A stable community relies on variety. The more different populations, the more stable the community. For example, if an animal has more than one food source and one disappears, the animal still has a food source. If the animal only has one food source and it disappears, the animal no longer has food and numbers of it will decrease. All changes in a population can have an effect on the wider community, sometimes large effects, but the more variation there is, the more different species there are, the more stable a community, which means it is more likely to survive any changes. Task: draw a food web for an ecosystem of your choice. Evaluate whether the ecosystem is stable. The more diverse and the more different organisms present in an ecosystem, the more stable the ecosystem is.